Hey guys, so tomorrow I'm going to meet with Mr. Beckett, who is an Islamic scholar that I'm going to be interviewing. My main questions for him are, I don't really want to know about like the theological beliefs of Islam, because we studied that and because I know a little bit about it kind of growing up, but more about the philosophical questions. So I'm really curious to see how Islam explains suffering. I'd really like to know his opinion on the question that we've been debating all year, which is, do all religions worship the same God? I'm really curious especially about the balance between the merciful and the fearful God, because it's something that like we struggle with in Christianity about, and that I often struggle with about, is God loving or does he judge, and where is the balance? And I'd like to see how Islam differs with that. And then I also want to talk to him a lot about the modern day problems going on in Islam. Extremism is one of the big questions, but I'm also really curious about the Shia-Sunni divide, and because in the Arab world it's really important, and it's kind of similar to the way the Protestant and Catholic divide was years ago, where everyone is fighting and there's all these wars and people killing each other from the same religion. And I want to know kind of what he thinks about, is this rift shallow enough that eventually it will be solved and that they can coexist peacefully the way Christians do now, or is this a really deep theological and social rift that won't be solved? So those are a couple of the questions I have about Islam that I'm really curious about and that I hope he can help me solve. And I heard a lot of great things about him, so I'm kind of curious to just get to know him and have a nice political discussion. And nice spiritual discussion. Some of we've been discussing the big questions of philosophy and religion, and I just want to know, not necessarily Islam's opinion, but kind of yours and what your shape. So one of the main ones that I personally struggle with a lot of question is where does suffering come from? And why does God allow suffering in the world?
Okay, if you look at it from an Islamic perspective, let's stick to that. I mean, it is my field, although a comparative religion, and nonetheless, for righteous people, there's a saying, they say they await sufferings like people await gifts. So, from that perspective, if a righteous person suffers from illnesses, from a disease, from poverty and the like, that actually increases his rank in relation to God. And if he remains patient with that, and if he perseveres, that actually gives him more reward in the hereafter, and that would give him a higher rank in paradise. So they look, from an Islam perspective, Muslim scholars look at suffering from a positive perspective, that although I am facing many hardships in this world, nonetheless I know that if I remain patient and I don't object to God, for afflicting that upon me, that would mean that I would have a high rank. There's also another perspective, if you want a more intellectual perspective to that. They say that, this whole world is owned by God. So isn't it the case that God created the world according to, those who believe in the existence of God? So you say yes. And further to that, they would say, so God owns us all. So okay, they believe in that. So therefore, if he owns you, he can do with you whatever he wants. So they look at it from that different perspective. I trust and I believe that, sufferings are afflicted upon believers and non-believers. Whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, you will probably at one point in time in your life face a hardship. But for believers, that is a thing that they look forward to.
So another question, a big question that I think religion answers to some point, but there's also a lot of differences, is kind of what is our role in the world? What is the human's role and what is their purpose?
Excellent question. Believers, or those who believe in religions, they believe in an afterlife, or otherwise known as the hereafter, or the other life. So they believe that this whole life is a test. So whether you succeed to go to the path of success eventually, or you fail and, as we say, you go, to hellfire. So, from a religious perspective, the purpose of us on this earth is to work towards surviving on that day, in the hereafter, on the day of judgment. Whether it's by being good to people, helping the poor, those who are in need. So doing the good stuff that would, as a person, as a believer, that would, get you to that goal. So ultimately, believers, they want to go to paradise. So they believe that this whole life is just a journey. So you start from birth to death. It's just a journey. You go left and right, up and down, all the way to death. So that you would, achieve that higher goal. That's our purpose on earth. But one thing, we don't actually know the future. So we don't know whether we will succeed or fail. But what would we do as human beings? We try our best to do the best, thing in our opinion and in our power.
I think it's kind of similar in Christianity that we also see like this world as like a transition.
Exactly.
Or a journey, and this isn't the end of humanity. This is just one, journey on the way to what it is.
Exactly. Even Prophet Muhammad, according to Muslims, he had a famous quote. He said that I am not a traveler. So I enter this world in a journey, and when I die, that journey is finished. So it's just a transitional phase all the way to the afterlife. So that's what believers normally have faith in.
So another question, and I'll just share the Christian perspective on this, and then I want to see how it compares to yours. There's a question of free will.
Okay.
So at least what I've brought up knowing in Christianity is that we have free will, that humans have free will.
Okay.
But at the same time, there's a question of, but God knows what is going to happen, and God has plans. So how can we have free will if our destiny is already laid out by God? So
that's
what's your
rather interesting question, and it is a highly debatable topic. And due to that in Islam, because of this topic, we had conversions and different sects, and people started to more or less kill each other because of this topic. Now, the mainstream Islamic belief in regards to this is that Muslims believe that God has predestined everything that will happen now all the way to the future. So there's a famous saying that Muslim scholars, they normally say, God knows what happened, what is happening, and what will happen, and what will not happen. Had it happened, how would it happen? There's a lot of happening. Yeah. So they believe that everything is predestined by God. Now, so does that mean that we have no will, that we are like puppets, as some people might use that term? Muslims say that's not the case. We believe that I, as a human being, I have a will. Now, I can choose to go to lunch today, and I can choose not to go to lunch. Now, do I know exactly whether I will go to lunch or not? Initially, I might not know. I might be confused. Okay, so I would probably choose to go to lunch or not. So the fact that I have two options and I'm choosing between that or the other, that illustrates that, I do have a will. So I'm not compelled, I'm not forced. But that does not, it's not against the fact that God knows everything. Okay, there's a famous, and that's quite complex to some people. They say human beings, they have a will that is slightly mixed with jabr, compulsion. So you don't have your absolute free will, and you're not absolutely compelled. So you can choose whether to do that or not, but ultimately we believe that God knows. So we say we have free will, but it is not in a way that we know what's going to happen.
So kind of like you can choose whether to go to lunch
Exactly.
or not, but God knows what you're going to choose.
Exactly, yes.
And so the second part of this kind of discussion is I want to compare some of the spiritual worldviews.
Yes.
Not necessarily Christianity, Islam, but generally. And I think one of the main ones that I don't know enough about the way that some use it is God's relationship with humans, and the contrast between merciful and judgmental. So in Christianity, there's a lot of argument about this because many people see, you have to do things right or else God will judge you. But then, a huge sect of Christianity is against that because they say, look, God is loving. And that's kind of personally what I've grown up believing, is that God is loving and God has a very interpersonal relationship with humans. And of course, we need to do what's right and wrong and
Yeah.
follow His will. But at the end of the day, He loves us and He cares about us.
Okay.
He's not just judging. But again, this is something that is like very highly debated in Christianity, and that's something.
I mean,
What
that,
your
my
beliefs
dear,
are.
that goes back to the conflict of no salvation outside your religion. Okay, so that all, you can trace that back to that argument. So, for example, in Judaism, they might say that anyone who is not an adherent to Judaism, he won't go, he won't be successful in the afterlife. And in Christianity, they say, some sects do actually acknowledge that. They say anyone who's not a believer in Christianity, he will not survive in the hereafter. And likewise in Islam. So the concept of no salvation outside your religion, that is very common in religion. So from that we can take that believers normally, they believe that God is merciful, yet you mustn't, fear His wrath. So although God wants, or he ordered us to do that which is good, and He wants for human beings to succeed in this life and in the hereafter, but that does not necessarily mean that everyone will do that. And we know that for our actions we have consequences, don't we? So if you afflict harm upon people, do you expect everyone to be merciful to you? That's not always the case. So if you go and you slap your classmate, okay, would you go and say to her, okay, you have to be merciful? It doesn't work like that. So there are consequences to your actions. Although we say that God, He loves the believers and He promised them, a lot of luxuries and a lot of good stuff in the hereafter, that does not conflict with the fact that if you don't follow the orders, the same thing applies to this world and the law that we follow. So in each country we have a law. If you steal, that's the consequences. If you go and kill, that's what will happen to you. I won't go and say to the judge, please be merciful, and every judge will have to pardon me. It doesn't work like that. So just as we accept it in this world, how come we don't accept it about the Creator? So if you understand this reasoning, that's how they normally go about it.
Okay. So another debate we've been having a lot in actually my class is this question of, do all religions worship the same God? Are all religions the same?
This is an excellent question.
Yeah, and what I see a lot personally as the argument for why they are is they say, look, we all have the same morals, we all, are safe to be compassionate to other people, give to the poor, don't murder, don't steal. But at the same time, are these pure, for me personally, I don't see these as purely religious ethics. These are everyone who uses these ethics and most religions. So now that doesn't necessarily mean that all religions don't have a lot of things in common, but for me, I don't think the commonality is the ethical code, because the ethical code is the same among cultures, across religions, across different things.
That's so true. This is a very interesting question. In my opinion, if you go deep and you understand religion, you would come to the conclusion that Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, they don't worship the same God. Okay, and likewise with Christians, they say that Muslims don't worship God, and you get all sorts of and likewise Muslims they say Christians don't. So it's you can't. There's a common quote that I've been hearing a lot, which is, don't try to reconcile between Islam and Christianity and Judaism and all sorts of religions. Just you cut to the conclusion that they don't worship the same God. You can't say we are the same religion. You can't say we have the same God. Muslims worship the Creator of everything, and they say He is unlike anyone or anything. And Muslims actually believe that you can't imagine God, okay? And He transcends space and time and all that. According to Jews, for example, they say that God has a certain form and He is in a certain place. Okay? In Christianity, you have the Trinity, and you have again the disagreements whether it's each one is a divine entity itself, or is it all three of them. So they do not worship the same God. Now the moralities that don't kill, don't steal, trust me, they exist in all religions. All religions advocate that. They say and promote it. But to argue that all of them worship the same God, that would be so invalid.
I think it's okay for them to be different. And
They are. You can't argue that they are the same. You cannot. No one would accept that. A Christian won't accept that. A Jew won't accept. A Muslim won't accept that. You can't argue to say all three worship one God. It's not true. That's not true, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's part of the diversity of religion. That we see
That's
things in
why
different
we
ways.
differ from other people
Yeah.
and they differ from us. That's why. That's why.
Contemporary issues with religion, and of course the most obvious one probably is radicalization. And I guess my question is, there's obviously a lot of factors that come into why people tend to go to extremism at this point in time for Islam, but throughout the ages in different religions. A lot of it is poverty, a lot of it is like ostracization from society, a lot of it is sometimes just at an age of a religion happens. But then others will argue that no, certain verses in Islam or certain, the way the Quran is written lends itself to radicalization or lends itself to misinterpretation. I don't agree with that, but I just want to
Go ahead. I mean, a lot of people have argued that, and they have used a lot of verses of the Quran as references. And I tell you that, although there are verses of the Quran that do state that, okay, but that was in that time and that age, okay. People are misinterpreting these verses, okay. And one thing, to observe, which is rather, annoying for a Muslim at this time and age, which is, why is every act of, violence, okay, straight away it's related or it's linked with Islam, okay? Now, one might argue that, look at what the Zionists are doing in Palestine. One might argue that, okay, no one is saying that Judaism is the religion of terror and Judaism promotes killing. They just say, the government does such and such and such, okay? Look at the Crusades in Christianity. How many thousands of people were slaughtered? Look at what Christians in the past did to the Jews. Okay? Have you heard of the Spanish Inquisition? How they kicked them out, how they slaughtered them, and the Jews sought refuge and sought the help of the Ottomans. So now they say it's Islam. Back in the day, they used to say it's just governments and monarchies and people. They never linked it with Christianity and the Ten Commandments of the Jews. Now they link it with Islam. So why is this happening now? Clearly there are people who speak in the name of Islam, and Islam does not acknowledge any of what they do. But my argument is, why is the West and the media of the West, why are they tackling Islam? Why are they accusing Islam of that and not looking at other acts of death and murder in the Middle East and what the states did in Iraq? I mean, you have a lot of examples, but you don't hear anyone saying Christianity or Judaism. You hear them saying the United States of America or the Zionist state of Israel. But when it comes to Muslims, they say it's Islam. So don't link it to the religion, link it to the radicalists who misunderstood the religion. That's my argument. And anyone who can argue that about Christianity in the Crusades, about Jews in Palestine or the occupied lands, anyone can argue that. But no one would accept it.
Yeah.
That's the issue. That's why you need to raise awareness. It's a time of raising awareness.
Okay, and my second question is, where do you see the future of the Sunni-Shia divide? I know in Christianity there was a lot of fighting, 30 years war in Europe over Catholicism and Protestantism, and now, even though there's still tension, they're mostly living peacefully.
Coexisting.
Coexisting.
They
A
are.
lot of people, Protestants go to Catholic churches and vice versa. Do you think that's going to happen one day, or is it too big of a divide?
Doubt it, to be honest. Based on what I've been seeing, there's a lot of death and murder and killing, some parts of the Arab world, and I can attest to that. If you have a Sunni name and you go to a Shia city, you might be slaughtered, and vice versa. Just because you have a Sunni name or a Shia name, and trust me, it's not getting any better, and it's really upsetting. It's genuinely upsetting.
I mean, I don't know if it's true, but I heard a rumor that actually the Islamic State hates the Shias more than they hate the Christians.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they used to say, kill a Shia, you go to paradise. Straight away. Like, that's a ticket to paradise. It's really hard. You people need to raise awareness. That's the only way we can change this abhorrent time and age. And especially the people who are distorting the image of Islam, and it's utterly unacceptable. And Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of conservative people and there are a lot of people who are trying hard. Social media in the West, in the East, in the Middle East, Arab world, Islamic world, trying to restore this pure image of this religion, but it's not an easy job. And the West ought to help, the Muslims in that, trust me. It's the media, it's a big key player in this whole region. So let's hope something happens in the future. But sadly, it doesn't look like it's getting any better.
Thank you so much. Hey guys, so I had my meeting with Mr. Beckett yesterday, and I really, really enjoyed it, talking to him. I mean, I thought we were going to talk for about 10-15 minutes, and we went on for like 25 minutes. And I think what I learned from it, a lot of his answers, I guess I expected, which was surprising for me because I was, to a certain extent, hoping to have a lot of like my assumptions or my views challenged. But I think it was also good because it showed that like a lot of what I believed about Islam was true. So one of the things that I was curious about was the question of do all religions worship the same God? And I would expect, just as I expect a lot of really faithful Christians to say no, also a lot of faithful Muslims say no. And he did say that, and he talked about why that was. I think he gave a pretty good answer that I agreed with. What I found really curious was his answer to the question about suffering, because in Christianity we kind of explain suffering as because God gave free will to humans, or at least for me personally, because God gave free will to humans, we have abused that and we've made suffering. And if God was to demolish all suffering from the world, then he would also be taking away our free will. And so that suffering is not something that comes from God. But Mr. Beckett's explanation, while I think strong, was very different. It was that in Islam, people actually wait for suffering. They welcome suffering because they see it as kind of a test from God. And the more people endure suffering, the more likely it is that they will get into heaven. And so it is kind of a blessing in disguise, suffering, which is very different from the Christian view, but also an explanation. And it was, I was glad to see that, that Islam also had an explanation for that question, because a lot of people say, how can all these major religions believe in a God who is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-loving, and yet lets people suffer? And even though we disagree on the why, I think a lot of the major world religions have explanations for that. What I really found interesting was when he talked about Shia and Sunni divide, because that was a question I was hoping and I was expecting that he would say that, it started off as such a shallow theological thing, in that it wasn't really about the beliefs in God. It was just about which, if it was Ali or if it was Abu Bakr who should be the first caliph. So that's a really minor distinction. But, when Mr. Beckett explained it to me, he said it's really been years, like hundreds and hundreds of years of a divide and hundreds of years of people killing each other. That even if theologically it wasn't a big deal in the beginning, now it has become so bad that he doesn't think it's going to be solved anytime soon. And that's really sad to hear. I don't agree with him personally, just because we've seen so many times when two societies or two cultures or two religions or two sects, and including in Christianity with the 30 Years' War, that people kill each other and it's horrible, and then eventually they reconcile. And so I'm hopeful that eventually they will reconcile. But I think Mr. Becker knows a little bit more about the issue than I do, so I trust his viewpoint, and I think he hopes as well that he's wrong. And in general, it's just really nice to have a discussion with someone about philosophical issues that has a different worldview than I do. We agreed on a lot of things, and even though I disagreed with him on some of the specifics about kind of the character of God, or on the reasons for suffering, and things like those, in general, I think he had his outlook on faith and his outlook on life. And especially, we had a really good conversation about like what the role of life is and what faithful people's role in life and their meaning to their life was. And we found a lot of similarities between Christianity's view of life as a transition period and Islam's view of life as a journey. And also, a lot of secular people see life as a journey. So that was really nice to see. So yeah, lots of differences, lots of similarities, and just, it was nice to kind of compare, not theological differences, but more philosophical, big questions and big answers with someone of a totally different worldview than me. And I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad I did it. And I'm also going to be speaking to an imam soon because I couldn't schedule a meeting with him until this weekend, and hopefully he will also further enlighten me. But for now, this is me signing out.